We acknowledge that we are streaming to you today from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. We respect their spiritual relationship with their country.
We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and we respect that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today.
We extend that respect to all First Nations people watching and sharing with us today. Hi, I'm Sam.
Hi, I'm Ashton.
And we are moderators at MOD. And MOD stands for the Museum of Discovery. And we are a future-focused museum that explores art, science and innovation.
And right now you are watching MOD TV, which is the latest venture for MOD. So we stream live content directly to your screens 4 days a week. And we're engaging with themes of connection, wellbeing and disruption by looking deeper into our exhibits, interviewing special guests, hosting games and much more.
Our current online exhibition at MOD is Life Interrupted, where we are exploring well-being and connection in a disrupted world. Today, we would like to focus on well-being. And to help us do that, we're pleased to welcome Professor Siobhan Banks. Professor Siobhan Banks is a co-director of the Behaviour-Brain-Body Research Centre at the University of South Australia.
Siobhan's current research sits at the nexus of biology, fatigue and circadian rhythms, behaviour, individual and team performance, and technology, human-centred design. Her research focuses on the impact of sleep deprivation and shift work on psychological and physiological functioning, and how countermeasures may be used to prevent the negative effects of disturbed sleep, in particular, novel technologies, dietary interventions, napping and caffeine.
Please welcome Siobhan Banks. And as Siobhan joins our conversation, just a reminder to everyone watching the stream, if you have any comments or questions, just chuck them up on the stream chat and we'll try and work them into today's conversation. Hi, Siobhan.
Hi, Siobhan.
Hi, how are you doing? Hi, everyone.
Great to have you.
And thanks for joining us today. Your work in sleep research is incredibly relevant to the theme of well-being. You've also previously contributed to a MOD exhibition piece, Sleep Ops. And when did your interest for the power of sleep start, and what sparked your interest?
Oh, well, I think sleep is super interesting to everybody. We spend a good third of our lives sleeping, or hopefully, and it's, obviously something we know that has a big influence on our lives. So I've always been interested in how our behaviour and our biology interact. And it was really a few years ago when I got a job as a research assistant in a sleep laboratory, watching people sleep. And so that's where my whole love for investigating and research sleep started.
And I remember from the exhibition piece, Sleep Ops, that there was a line in that, and it might have changed now, I'm not sure, but it says, we don't really know why we sleep. But a lack of it can greatly affect our ability to make good decisions and our mood and our well-being. Is that still the case? We don't know exactly why we sleep?
Yeah, we have some pretty good theories. So we know that it's involved in sort of recovery and basically, recovering some of our normal daytime functions, and we know that it's involved in consolidating memories, for example. But we really don't know the exact function of sleep. So we know it's involved in all of these different things, more because when we take sleep away, we see that all these functions are affected. But we're still really trying to nail down exactly why we sleep. And it seems to be a little bit different for different species. Although all mammals sleep, it's different across different species.
Wow, that's so interesting. Is there a species you can think of that sleeps the most?
Oh, we know, for example, that like koalas sleep an awful lot. They're kind of up at the 14, 15 hours a day. And then there are some animals that one half of the brain sleeps while the other is awake, like dolphins. They have something called unihemispheric sleep. That means that they're still able to sort of swim around and be somewhat aware of their environment while part of their brain is asleep. So it's super fascinating. Every different species kind of has a different way, a different pattern to their sleep.
That is so interesting. In terms of your sleep research, what's been the most challenging aspect of that so far?
Probably actually studying humans because people are so varied and so different. And so what I do in particular is study people in a laboratory environment where people all come, usually about 4 or 5 people together to live in a laboratory environment. And we put them on different sleep schedules, might be sort of a simulated shift work type schedule, and we look to see how that impacts their cognitive function or their health. And so because we're bringing people together, of course, then you've got different personalities, and the way people interact with each other will affect our results. So probably the most challenging thing is, the fact that we're studying humans, and humans are such complex, interesting people.
Absolutely. You could start a sleep-based Big Brother, perhaps.
We do actually, every time we run a study, we have to say this is not Big Brother. We don't have any weird things going on that, you're not aware of. Because people naturally think our lab looks a little bit, maybe not as flash, but a little bit like a Big Brother kind of environment.
Now, I'm really interested in this because ever since I was a child, have found it really hard to go to sleep. In the research you've done, what do you think people find most difficult in improving their sleep?
Yeah, well, sleep is a behaviour. So while it has some biological processes that are associated with it, and we all need to sleep. So just to make you feel a little bit better, eventually you will sleep. So even if you're having a tough time getting off to sleep, a little bit of sleep deprivation sometimes isn't a bad thing, because it does help you get off to sleep at a later time. But it is a behaviour, and all the behaviours around going to sleep are really important, but also hard to change. So when we see that there's, the time taken for people to fall asleep can be dramatically affected by, for example, the devices they use before going to bed, or whether they're stressed about things during the day, how anxious they are about whether they may or may not get enough sleep, can all impact those behaviours about getting off to sleep. And so what you do right before bed is actually terrifically important for helping you get off to sleep.
Interesting. Do you have any tips for a useful sleep routine?
Yeah, I think you've just said the right word, routine.
Okay.
And particularly if you find it difficult to get off to sleep, or you feel kind of very wound up when you get into bed, what we find is that some people associate being in bed trying to fall off to sleep with a tremendous amount of anxiety. So it's all about kind of trying to get rid of those anxieties before going to bed. And that might mean having a nice shower or bath, or reading a book. It's something I do, is read a book before going to sleep, just to help me kind of shift away from all the things that I'm thinking about during the day. Certainly, watching some crazy Netflix binge-worthy kind of series is not great right before bed. Anything that kind of activates you too much. So you want to be thinking about all the things that are relaxing and that can help you get off to sleep. And that's going to be a bit different for each person.
Thank you. Those are good tips. And we've just had a question come through on our chat thread. Does Siobhan sleep really well because she knows so much about it?
So I have 2 young children. So my sleep's a bit better now than it used to be, but certainly am not. I might know a lot about sleep, but I'm not an expert sleeper. And I think that's something to also know, that you can be aware of all the things that you're supposed to do, but still find it quite tricky. So I still have to remind myself to turn the TV off and give myself a chance to relax at night. I certainly use devices like reading a book, old-fashioned book, before going to sleep. So I do find that my sleep is sometimes disturbed, particularly if I'm worried about things. But I think the key is that to know that you will go to sleep at some stage. So even if you have a couple of nights of bad sleep, your body will compensate for that in the days to come. So try not to be too worried about the fact that you might be feeling a little bit sleepy during the day or might not perform at your absolute best. Your biology will take care of itself, and you will be able to sleep well in the future.
That's a nice message of reassurance because, I think, sometimes you do have a stream of evenings or where you're not getting enough sleep, and it's nice to know that as long as we give ourselves enough space and time, that our body will catch up.
Yep, absolutely.
To some extent. And interesting also to find out, like you hear about a plumber's house always their own house has terrible plumbing, and an electrician's house has terrible electric. Interesting to know that the sleep researcher doesn't necessarily always have the best night's sleep. Thank you for your candor.
Yes.
And now I know that you work across industry and various organisations in your research. What do you hope that the people who are engaging in your research take away from your work?
Yeah, I think the really important thing is to make sleep a priority. Not to worry about it too much, but to prioritize it in your life. I think a lot of people are so busy with their lives and busy with all the different things that they're doing that they don't allow that space, just as you said, that sort of space for sleep. And so that's a really important thing, allowing the space to kind of relax before going to bed, and to sort of see it as a bit of a process, that you can't just expect your brain just to switch off and be completely comatose for 8 hours and then wake up again. That's not how sort of sleep works. So I think to be able to understand that there might be times that you wake up during the night, and that's quite normal. But to see it as a really important aspect of your health and well-being, just like diet and exercise, and to really think about sleep more deliberately so that you're kind of creating that space and that relaxation space for yourself to have a good sleep.
Yeah, it's interesting that that link with well-being. I guess sort of your research draws out the fact that the amount of sleep you're getting and how you're sleeping does have a strong connection with your day-to-day well-being.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we know from research that it can also affect your food choices and your diet, or your ability to maintain a healthy weight, for example. And then also your motivation around exercise, or how well you perform. So a lot of athletes, for example, are now really studying and looking after their sleep, because they know that their best performance it will come from after having a good night's rest. And so we kind of can see that all of these things are linked together. And so that, getting that really great sleep not only, makes you feel like you can take on the challenges of the day and make you feel less stressed, but it also will increase your kind of performance towards your sports, or be able to stick to a more healthy diet.
That link to diet is so interesting. As soon as you said that, I thought back to when I was at uni and would do all-nighters on assignments, and the next day was all coffee and junk food because you just needed that instant hit of sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not only a physiological need, so you get those food cravings, but also that psychological thing of kind of like, oh my God, I've been up all night. I feel so terrible and tired. I deserve to have that packet of chips or that ice cream. And then of course, once you start, it's really hard to stop. So, those sorts of things, that sort of the way we think about what we do during the day, and then some of the physiological kind of influences as well, are all tied to sleep.
Now we've got a question coming through from the chat. They're asking, do we really need 7 to 8 hours sleep a night? Age aside, do we know why some people need more sleep than others?
Really good question. So it is quite variable. And so the American Sleep Foundation put out a consensus statement a few years ago, which is a little bit different to a research statement, because a consensus statement is where scientists have all come together to try and reach an agreement about what they think the right amount of sleep is. And interestingly, it was a very broad range for adults. So they sort of said, yeah, around that sort of 7 hours is probably optimal. But then there's this huge kind of range, so that some people will find that they're totally fine on 5 or 6 hours, or some people that really need more. Maybe they're more at the sort of 9 hour kind of level. And so we see that normal kind of human variability in sleep need. And sometimes it changes as well. So if you're going through a very high workload kind of phase, or you're feeling very stressed, you might need a bit more sleep. Or, if you're on vacation and, living the good life kind of thing, you might find that 6 hours is okay. So, but generally our sleep need is determined by our genetics. That's what we think. And so we do see this wide variability. We're not really sure, apart from perhaps this kind of genetic side to sleep need, we're not really sure why some people need more than others. But we do know, as I said, that sometimes that can change a little bit depending on what you do with your day.
That's interesting. I really noticed, Sam, I don't know if you noticed this too for yourself, but when the COVID stuff first started and we had that lockdown, the first couple of weeks of that, I was so tired all the time, even though I was doing far less. And I wonder if that ties in with what you've just said about stress and anxiety and those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we really experienced a high level of kind of emotional fatigue. And so while we weren't particularly maybe as physiologically kind of active, we weren't necessarily out and about doing as much. Um, there was that factor, that there was the emotional fatigue. I think also it sort of unmasked some of our sleepiness, because we were just sort of sitting around and not doing all the busyness, rushing, to and from different places. It sort of unmasked the pre-existing sleepiness that we did have, or perhaps we were carrying with us at all times, but you didn't notice, unless you're in a boring meeting, maybe. Or the other thing it could be is that it was your body was basically telling you that your actual sleep need is a bit more than what you'd been getting habitually. So maybe that you were going through a process of getting a little bit more sleep, or needing a little bit more sleep, and your body was kind of catching up.
Interesting.
Yes, and we've just got another question through. They're asking specifically, what does being on Zoom or a similar video chat formats, why does being on Zoom make us tired? Is it physiological or psychological, or both?
Yeah, another really good question that people are kind of, struggling with at the moment. It is so exhausting to be on Zoom all the time. And I think what part of it is that even though you might have, a 7 hour work day where you're busy in meetings and that kind of thing, you're not kind of necessarily having to be on, as much as Zoom. So Zoom, you takes all your focus. You're looking at everybody. You're trying to actively engage everybody's faces a lot more than perhaps you might in a meeting, where it's much more acceptable to look away or to be writing notes. And some of the meetings actually just occur around the water cooler, or while you're making a cup of coffee. They're not, or standing up, for example, they're not always sitting in the one spot looking at a camera. So I think all of that, plus the fact that we've got all this other stuff going on in our lives at the same time, just adds to this overall kind of feeling of fatigue. And it's probably exacerbating those, normal kind of feelings that we might have from a lot of Zoom sessions.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing I remember from their exhibition piece, Sleep Ops, was that the research shows that after 17 hours of wakefulness, or 17 hours without sleep, the decline in cognitive performance and is comparable to alcohol intoxication of 0.05, so our driving alcohol limit. And I also remember, I think just anecdotally, there's been some geniuses in the past that are reported they only sleep for 4 hours a night. So maybe if you could talk to those two things a little bit.
Yeah, so really interesting research that actually came out of University of South Australia in the late 90s, was really looking at comparing our cognitive performance while being awake with what it's like when we've taken on some alcohol, trying to sort of help people understand what it's like to have a continuous period of wakefulness. And sort of that 16 or 17 hours is pretty much your might be kind of an extended day for you, what it might be around bedtime, what you're feeling around bedtime. And so we see that there's this quite clear cognitive impairment that occurs with being awake for long periods. And it actually gets worse as you sort of go into the early hours of the morning. So if you're awake all night, people really do start to struggle around that 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. They start to feel cold because our core body temperature is dropping. Cognitive performance really declines. Alertness, gets really hard, so you can't stay awake as easily. And so that's where we see these, we've got these comparisons to alcohol intoxication. And so it's really useful for when we go into industry, for example, and be able to help people understand why it's bad to be awake for, long periods of time, or how decision making might be affected. And the second question I've just forgotten.
It's just that funny old anecdote that there's sort of Einstein only slept for 4 hours a night, or other geniuses in history apparently.
Yes, and politicians also say this one all the time, although maybe they're not so genius. There's, they're always kind of saying, oh yes, I only need 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever. And I think certainly there are some people that only need a small amount of sleep. I don't think it necessarily goes with being a genius per se. I think maybe they were just super active brains, and so they're wanting to be up all the time doing stuff, thinking about things and whatever. We also never hear about the times that they go into any recovery sleep. So we don't hear about the maybe days of sleep that they had when they've sort of recovered from these periods of time of being awake. And we do from time to time hear about some of these crazy schedules that people are talking about, 20-minute nap every couple of hours, or, something like that. They're really hard schedules to keep for a long period of time. So we do see that while you can reduce your sleep to 3 or 4 hours for, maybe a week, we do also know that for most people that's associated with cognitive decline. And so there's a price to pay for that level of kind of wakefulness. And so what I think is probably happening with some of the politicians, for example, is that they're getting a sneaky nap in there somewhere that they're not telling us about. Or they're having lots of coffee.
That's so interesting to think about. Now I'm going back to all those people I've heard humble brag about not sleeping very much. Mm-hmm. They're not telling me about their naps.
Exactly.
So in terms of sleep research, what's next for you in this space?
Yeah, well, so many different areas to try and look at. I mean, some of the stuff that we don't really have a great handle on is how groups of people change with sleep loss or with time of day. So we know that teams are exceptionally important, and the performance in teams are really, really important. But we don't really know much about how a team performs at 3 o'clock in the morning. There's lots of anecdotal kind of research, and we know that some of the big sort of industrial accidents, for example, have been a result of teams not working very well. But we don't have much of an understanding of some of those kind of dynamics of how a team actually changes and what kind of goes wrong, so that we can put in place some countermeasures to prevent or to assist teams. And I think kind of alongside of that is around technology and kind of future of work, and how obviously the workplace is going to be changing. I mean, in the post-lockdown kind of world, it's going to be very, very different. So in the near future, and then in the more far future as well, when we're thinking of working with technology and robots and those kinds of things, what do we need to be mindful of in the workplace if we're not getting enough sleep? How could it impact some of those interactions as well? So that's just some of the areas we're going into, but lots of stuff around how it impacts health and cognitive performance. All of those things obviously still need lots of work. And of course, always the really important question, how much coffee do you need to stay awake?
Absolutely. I feel like that's especially an important question for Australian society because we're pretty into our coffees.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very important question.
And just the other thing I wanted to ask you, and you kind of touched on it a bit there, but in relation to this pandemic and this time that we're living through now, has that shifted your perspective on any of this sleep research or pushed it into some directions you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we expected that people's sleep would be disrupted. We
Mm.
expected that people would change some of their sleep habits or feel more fatigued, as
Mm.
you said. But I think what some of the things that are really interesting, or what I hope comes out of this period, is a renewed interest in kind of the well-being and taking time, allowing space for things like sleep, and realizing the sort of really important role that it has to play. I'm kind of hoping that this period of almost kind of reflection that we've had during the sort of lockdown has enabled us to think about some of these health aspects a little bit more. And while we might not necessarily have been motivated to get on the treadmill and go running or something, or start lifting weights, there are perhaps some other things like thinking about sleep, and hopefully prioritizing it a little bit more. That would be a great outcome of this sort of lockdown period.
Absolutely. I'm very happy for sleep to become more of a priority.
Yeah, and if I can maybe take up that and be a little bit selfish for Ashton and myself, and ask a question. We're both in a creative arts, where sometimes there's a professional culture of working long days and long nights, and also anecdotally, some artists you'll hear will say, oh, I had to be awake for so long to come up with this creative idea. So they believe maybe sleep deprivation helps creativity, but then I read in the research that it actually hinders, or a certain amount hinders creativity. So yeah, maybe if you could talk around that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting sweet spot that sort of happens where you get just enough sleep deprivation so that your kind of thinking becomes a little bit more labile. Perhaps you're kind of thinking outside the box a little bit more. Um, then, of course, it goes downhill on the other side if you kind of have too much. And so I think, a little bit isn't necessarily a bad thing. I wouldn't say that, while obviously we're advocating for making sleep a priority and thinking about sleep as being a, really important thing for health, some of these times when, you have to work longer hours, or might be because you are trying to solve a creative problem or develop something, or have a breakthrough, some of those times require sometimes a little bit of sleep deprivation. I think it's making sure that you're thinking about the kind of longer term, and, more longer term, what is a healthy sleep amount for me? But yes, obviously in the creative arts, it's often a slightly different sleep schedule than might be for people who work 9 to 5. And I think another message is that, as long as you're getting a reasonable amount of sleep, and while it is a bit harder to sleep during the day, it's all about getting that amount over a 24-hour period. So, if you need to be up till late, and you're going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, but you're able to get a 4 or 5 hour sleep then, and maybe a nap in the afternoon. It's the overall amount of sleep that you get in a 24 hours that's really important. And I think so, it's being able to be flexible in your thinking, and making sure that what you've got to get done in your day fits around your other requirements like sleep, so that you're able to stay healthy.
That's good to know. And I think that's great knowledge as well for shift workers, hospitality workers, truck drivers. There are so many professions that don't fit within that 9 to 5 frame.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so it's important to sort of think that it's the overall amount of sleep that you get, and that's why naps can be really good. That can help supplement your overall, sleep amount.
And if people are interested in finding out more about your research and this field, where would you suggest that we start to look?
Yeah, so obviously my homepage at UniSA, they've got I've got all of my information up there. But also, if people are more interested in broadly finding out about sleep, the Sleep Health Foundation website is fantastic. It's an Australian website, and it's been put together by the foundation, but the information has been written by physicians and psychologists who specialize in sleep. So you know that the information is really, really good, but it's very, very accessible. So it's a great resource if you want to research a little bit more broadly about sleep and all the different aspects of sleep.
Great. Thank you so much, Siobhan. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. And I also feel quite justified now next time I take a nap. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Naps are good.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me on today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. See ya.
Well, that was great. I got a lot out of that, Ashton.
Oh, me too. I had to stop myself from writing notes. I was like, it's okay. You can watch this back later.
Yeah, I think I discovered that my spirit animal might be a koala.
Oh, absolutely. I always thought my spirit animal was a teenager because I still sleep like I did as a teenager, but maybe it's just that I'm a koala. And I've always been a koala.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in. It's been great chatting with our guest, Siobhan Banks. And thanks to the team behind the scenes. We had Samuel, Kat, Hen, Becky, and Claudia. We'll be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. with another edition of Mod TV featuring Connell Lee on pandemic ethics.
Oh, that'll be a super interesting one as well. And in the meantime, if you would like to see more of what's happening at Mod, you can head to our website, mod.org.au, or our Facebook or our Instagram. Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See ya.